What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, undefeated three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world, simply exposes his promoter, legendary promoter, top-ranked CEO, Bob Arum, indirectly by trying to defend himself, essentially. Terence Bud Crawford, he states that Bob Arum informed him prior to the Victor Postal fight in his first pay-per-view. He continuously told Terence Crawford that there was no budget for Terence Crawford. There was no budget for pay-per-view. This is what Terence Crawford had to say regarding this topic. Okay? So he says that they essentially, now we know, they just weren't interested in investing in Terence Crawford, right? This is what we already knew, but Terence Crawford indirectly confirmed what we already knew. Thus, the reason why boxing fans, pundits, and media were slightly baffled that Terence Crawford re-signed with Top Rank when he became a free agent without exploring other options, especially when he moved up to welterweight and the majority of the superstar welterweights are on the Premier Boxing Champion side, PBC side. All of them are there. So it's going to take some real extensive work for Terence Crawford to get these fights on a consistent basis, as he is on, was at the time HBO, now with ESPN, and they fight on a whole different network that are rival networks. So it's not just the promoters, because I see a lot of people saying that the promoters need to work together. That's the least of everybody's worries. Everybody overlooks the main ingredient is the networks need to be on board, and they don't want to do business with one another. They don't want to share the pot. They don't want to share the pie. That's not their interest, especially when it comes to the sport of boxing, when both Fox and Showtime, mainly Fox in this case, have other vested interests. They are heavily married to the four mainstream sports: NFL, National Football League; MLB, Major League Baseball; NBA, National Basketball Associations; and NHL, National Hockey League. This is where their commitment lies, not to mention NCAA football and basketball. That's where their main focus is, not the sport of boxing. And so you have to have these two networks, massive networks who are natural rivals, be on board before anything, before the promoters, before the fighters. Who has to be on board first? The networks. That's what drastically gets overlooked. When you have a fighter signed with a certain network, everybody overlooks it and says, well, the promoters and the fighters need to work together. That's the least of the worries. Like I said, the main ingredient is the network. If the network is not on board, you do not have a fight. Point blank and period. It does not matter what the promoters and fighters want to do, because they need the networks to promote them. They need the networks, those platforms, to stage the fights. That's the most important ingredient in the entire meal. Okay? So with that said, that drastically gets overlooked. And people automatically point fingers at the promoters and the fighters, saying this needs to be made. Well, if you don't have the networks on a consistent basis wanting to work together and share the revenue, they're not going to. ESPN is not going to want to share the pot with Fox on a consistent basis. That's not going to happen. Thus, when Terence Crawford re-signed with ESPN, you have to understand that ESPN may do business with Fox and Showtime for Errol Spence fight. That don't mean that they're on board to do business on a consistent basis, fight after fight, and have to split the pot, split the revenue with another mother network. That's not going to happen. So once again, that drastically gets overlooked. But Terence Crawford fought Victor Postal back in 2016, and Terence Crawford is stating that since then, Bob Arum, Top Rank, have been letting him know, informing him there just isn't a budget for him to fight on for pay-per-view. There's not a budget for these big fights. This is what Terence Crawford had to say when in regards to himself being promoted bigger and having pay-per-view events. This is what Terence Crawford had to say. So let's listen to what he had to say. Quote, right? He says, let's listen to what he had to say. He says, I never had the intention of leaving Top Rank. I have no clue where my moving to PBC, Brian Custer asking the question, came from, right? So he was saying that he never truly had interest in leaving Top Rank. His loyalty lies with Top Rank, right? He says, I'm the most loyal and hurt by Bob Arum he says, I am one of the most loyal and hurt at what Bob Arum is throwing at me. So he's saying he's hurt by what Bob Arum's recent comments of Terence Crawford not being a draw and losing money on him in the last 3 fights, right? So he really didn't want to get into this conversation. This is with Terence Crawford. But like I said, indirectly, Terence Crawford lets it be known, right, that Bob Arum let it be known that there is no budget for him, okay? So let's look at this. Let's read this, right? I never cared about money. This is what Terence Crawford had to say. I never cared about money. I took pay cuts and trash fights in the past. So he's letting it be known that they only gave him not so good fights, and he took pay cuts for these fights. He says, I never cared about the money. I took pay cuts and trash fights in the past. My goal is to move on up, and even the worst pay was a step forward for me. Then he says, I took pay cuts for the Victor Postal fight. Arum and Top Rank said that they didn't have what it takes for pay-per-view, and even said that they didn't have the budget for pay-per-view. So he's letting it be known that they continue to let him know that they didn't have a budget for him. They didn't have the pay-per-view. See, what he did was he let it be known that this had nothing to do with the other fighters not wanting to fight. And this has everything to do with Bob Arum not having the budget or not being willing to pay out the budget for these big fights. So he said that he was taking fights, trash fights, and pay cuts because the budget wasn't there for him. So when you have guys like Andre Ward and Timothy Bradley continuously telling the world that these premier boxing champion fighters, PBC fighters, are just not willing to fight Terence Crawford, or when you had the situation, this just goes to show and prove that Bob Arum just didn't want to pay Manny Pacquiao the $20 million that Manny Pacquiao was looking for to stage a Terence Crawford fight. And Bob Arum stated that he directly blocked the fight because he didn't want to see Manny Pacquiao get hurt in an advanced age. And he was feeling like Bob Arum was stating that Manny Pacquiao was pricing himself out as well. Okay? So since the Victor Postal fight, which was Terence Crawford's first pay-per-view event, they were letting Terence Crawford know that they didn't have the money for pay-per-view. And thus, they wasn't making big fights. As Terence Crawford says, I was taking trash fights because they didn't have the budget. So they was unwilling to pay for him the big fights. So Terence Crawford knows very well, he's very aware of the level of fighters that he's fighting are low-level fights because they don't have the budget. But they will make you seem like you are, or the media is pushing an agenda against Terence Crawford, when he clearly let it be known that no, there is no agenda, that it is the Top Rank and Bob Arum who are unwilling to pay big money to have Terence Crawford have these big legacy fights. But they'll tell you that Keith Thurman is pricing himself out. They'll tell you that Errol Spence don't want to fight. They'll tell you that Manny Pacquiao, who they said, Bob Arum said that he agreed to fight, was pricing himself out. They'll tell you that Sean Porter is not a worthy opponent. They'll tell you that they offered big money to Danny Garcia, which we know wasn't true. And now Terence Crawford indirectly let it be known that Bob Arum and Terence Crawford is well aware of the level of fighters that he's fighting. And he knows that they're not high-profile fights. So when everybody says that Terence Crawford is not fighting the big fights and Terence Crawford gets upset and tries to defend the level of opponents that he's facing, he knows very well that they are not high-level fights. He said it himself that he's fighting trash fights, and he's taking a pay cut to do so. Thus the reason why when we say we wanted Terence Crawford to move on for the betterment of Terence Crawford and the betterment of the sport of boxing and for Terence Crawford's legacy, we get labeled haters. When you just want to see Terence Crawford maximize on his legacy and his abilities. Terence Crawford lets it be known that he never has any plans because he's just loyal to Top Rank. He's loyal to the point of he would stay with Top Rank to take a pay cut to fight low-level fights. Need I say any more? Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, or one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.